Hey there, it's Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, Women on TV.tv. I do 247 out of Franklin, Tennessee, in the worldwide TV network of iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all the platforms around the world. So I've been looking forward to this because these guys, are not only are they iconic, what they don't know is my favorite song in the world, and I told Eddie this, is Ain't Talking About Love. So in the world that can say that their favorite song is Ain't Talking About Love. This song gets me going no matter what's going on, if I'm down, whatever. And I got a story to tell you about Ed, but I'll save you about that. So Chris, let's start off with you. Who are you and where you're coming from? And I love your background.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, this is that's the Van Halen concert stage from 2015. So I'm actually coming to you from northern New Jersey, just outside of New York City. Shout out to your homeboy out there in Franklin, Brad Paisley. So I know he's another Van Halen fan. So and he should be getting his copy of the book soon. But yeah, just I've been a writer for Guitar World for years, and this is kind of, this book is our project, our labor of love. Basically, this has been our driving force for many a year.
Brad, take it away. Come on, where are you coming from and who are you? Go ahead.
I'm coming from Massachusetts, a Cape Cod area, a little small town, hiding from the COVID a little bit out here. And I was editor-in-chief of Guitar World for many years, a couple decades. And I've written a couple of other books, A Light and Shade Conversations with Jimmy Page, and another book on the history of the electric guitar called Play It Loud. And, we felt it was our duty, knowing Ed as well as we both did, to write a great book in his honor.
I've been talking about this for years. I'll start here. I got a great photo of me and David Lee Raw, and it was on their reunion tour. And we met at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. And I said,
oh, wow.
I catch Ed, I'm going to catch David, because I was always a martial artist. I always liked what he did on stage. I always liked this band, not knowing their history. And I remember seeing way back a movie with the first album, and it just turned me on as a kid. Now, I grew up in Connecticut, so I grew up listening to rock and roll, but I also had the roots of, being that black guy, being that first disc jockey in an all-white club, all-white school in East Lyme, Connecticut. Wow. The disc jockey. So I learned how to mix rock and roll with Richard Pryor underneath. So I would, yes, with Richard Pryor's comedy lyrics over that, if you can imagine that, in 1978. And then I said, hey, these guys are introducing me to Kansas, to Styx, to all this stuff, but Van Halen did it for me. And till this day, I still have the old Torp original shirt, and I was always a fan. And so what you guys wrote about in this book is fabulous, for one. My hat goes off to you, because I talk to a lot of best and international authors from around the world. They've helped with us on a global point of things. But what you guys talked about is fabulous. I can't stop putting this book down, for one. I keep picking it up because I'm like, there's more stuff that I didn't know about. So talk about this. Chris, talk about this. Off the top of your head, what's a favorite memory of Ed? Just one off the top of your head, now thinking about it.
Well, the top of my head would be in 2013 when I went up to 5150, and it was an article for Guitar Aficionado magazine, cover story. It was about his guitar collection. And it was so cool to see all these instruments. And Ed told a story, and every guitar that he had a story behind it. And we also just sat around, and he told me some really cool stories, some stuff which will never ever appear in print. But it was really cool. I mean, there's one story, unfortunately, we wanted to put in the book, and I came to find out it probably wasn't exactly 100% true. So whatever. So, but that was it was great. I mean, Ed was just so personable. And I always, when I talked with Ed, he always felt like a brother, and a friend and a fellow guitar player, and just goes on and on. He wasn't this rock star. He was just a really cool guy. And that really came through to me during that time. And I think one of the greatest things is he told me a story. He had this big old 1947 Dodge truck, flatbed truck. It was this huge thing, cab over truck. And he was telling me this story. He drove this thing down the hill into the valley to go buy groceries at Trader Joe's, or he'd go off to Home Depot and buy stuff. And one day he was pulling out of the Trader Joe's parking lot, and it died. And it was like one of the major through streets there in the valley. And he was snarling traffic with this huge truck, and it's just like, and here I am, I'm Eddie Van Halen, and just people are like stopping, they're looking at this big truck and then they're seeing me, and he was so embarrassed by the whole thing that he'd caused this mess, and he was such a humble, regular guy. And I love the fact that he didn't send out a personal assistant to go buy his groceries. Ed was out there buying groceries for himself. What a cool guy.
Oh, Chris has heard this story before, but every time I think about it, sort of cracks me up. So I was hanging out with Ed backstage after one of his shows I think it was in Philly, and we're in this big arena, and we're backstage in the dressing room, and there's assorted people around and stuff. And Ed comes up to me and he says, Brad, I gotta tell you something. I gotta tell you. And I'm like, what is it, Ed? He's like, no, I don't want to do it here. You got to follow me. So I follow Ed out of the room, and he starts sort of like, if you've ever been backstage at a huge arena, it's like a maze. It's like a labyrinth back there. And so Ed's just walking around the back, and I'm following him. I'm like, where's this guy going? And then all of a sudden he takes a turn into the men's room. So we walk into this men's room. There's nobody else. There's just me and him there. And I go, what's up, Ed? And Ed goes, you got to do something with your hair. He's like, yeah, you gotta fluff it up. I don't know, like this thing isn't working for you. I didn't want to embarrass you in front of all of these people, but I just, so to me, that was so unexpected. And I just cracked up, it was so funny. But the thing about it was, he wasn't trying to diss me. He was like, hey man, you're my bro. I want you to look good. going out in the world,
No, okay. I've only told people this story of where I first met Ed, and it was at one of our friends' house. I'm just gonna say it. It was a small little private party that we did, and this is when he had throat cancer. So remember when he brought us his Red Viper? So
yeah.
That year, and he's sitting in the corner. He's got his shirt off. He's got his little ukulele. He's drinking his Jack Daniels, and he's smoking. He wasn't supposed to be doing these things. And I'm like, Ed, what are you doing? My favorite songs ain't talking about love. You got to stay alive. I don't want you to be doing this. And he goes, Brian, if you like that song, wait till you hear what we got coming out. And I got that. And it was just so classic Ed, as you guys would know. And then what happened was, there was a bunch of women around, and they didn't believe it was him. Why would he be here at this small little gathering? Well, it was our friend's house that he was doing special effects, and they would go shoot guns and things like that. This was one of Ed's places that he would just go get away and hang out and be himself. And I just never I never took a picture of that because I wanted to respect who he was. I go back and forth in my head on that, but it was a private party. People weren't supposed to be there. It was one of those, but it was just one of the things. And I never forgot that. And that's my favorite memory. And then the thing about this is I knew Janie, his second wife, before she married him. She was in the world of this, and she was on the adult side of things. So I had a friendship then. And I was like, and she was just such a wonderful woman. I thought they both made a great contribution to this life. Can you guys talk about what that was like? Because Valerie was great. I knew her from interviewing her on the TV side of stuff. And then I knew Janie from the adult side, and that was interesting.
Yeah.
Janie was a hugely important person for Ed. She helped him get through a really, really difficult, 10 years of his life, if not longer. She helped him finally kick his issues with substance abuse. And she was also by his side, through all the different various doctor's appointments and all of his various health issues. And anybody out there who's ever had a loved one that's had health issues knows how incredibly difficult that can be, even though you're empathetic towards obviously what the other person's going through. it's still not easy. And she was by his side and was a huge support during those very, very difficult years.
She really was Ed's angel. She was really looking out for him, and no disregard to Valerie, but Valerie had a very busy career of her own to look after. And I don't think she was really quite equipped and ready to deal with Ed when he was going through this rough patch, very rough patch with the cancer and everything. And, and various other things, substance abuse. And of course, it was also a very dark period for him too, with, the Van Halen 3 album not doing very well, and him going through all this constant changing singers, and just, it was, that any one of those things would knock somebody for a loop, but to be hit by all those things all at once is really rough, and then Janie comes along, and, it's kind of a weird thing because say what you will about the adult film industry, but it's, Ed was kind of in a dark place, and it seemed like for us fans watching him, was like, Ed, what are you doing? It's like, you're going deeper and deeper down the hole, because it's very unusual for an artist of Ed's stature to be doing music under his own name for an adult movie. And I think it may be even unique. I can't think of another instance of that, and I've looked into it. And, but that's how he met Janie. And she's the one who really turned him around and got him back on track. Now, Wolfgang played a big role in that too. I'm not going to downplay that, because Wolfgang was also becoming older. He was entering his later teen years. And so he was able to challenge his dad and just say, like, I'm not going to stand for you being this way anymore. I don't like seeing you like this. And I think that combination just really saved Ed's life. I think, we got more years out of him. We got more music out of him because of, these two loving people who just watched over him and did the really difficult work.
You guys made me understand a lot.
That needed to be done
actually, Michael,
to bring him out of that.
You guys made me understand a lot more when you were writing about the relationship of him and David. David was the more flamboyant, like, he'd go and take the adventures. And I just remember reading all that stuff, and I love that, me being from the martial art world. But I also was more curious about Ed, as we know, was laid back, now that I know why he was like that. But I didn't know that until reading you guys' books, which this book, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, is just one of the best ones that we have out there. And I'm not saying it just to say it. I'm saying because it filled in a couple of blanks that I always want to know. Imagine this. I was that black kid in Connecticut who was a ticket scalper, who never saw Van Halen until David came back. I gave my tickets to fans who wanted to see that. And I said, I'll just see them again. This was in the early 80s.
Wow.
They were touring, the New Haven Coliseum, the Hartford Civic Center, all those things. That's how I put myself to school. So I never knew years later when I moved to California that they would become friends. And such an honor. I mean, so when you guys put this stuff down in writing, you made me realize how human that most people are, the human side of him, the human side of David. And I want to thank you personally for that. Because again, how many black guys do you know ain't talking about love as their favorite song?
True. I will say this though, and partially it's thanks to David Lee Roth. I mean, David, as you probably are well aware, he liked the dance music, he liked disco, he liked funk, and he brought that element to the band. In their club days, they used to play It's Your Thing by the Isley Brothers, and Ed, said, yeah, but we sounded like Black Sabbath, as it says in the book. But, he brought that element there. And my gosh, what was it in 2012, they brought out Casey and the Sunshine Band out to open for them. That was like, Kool and the Gang. Kool and the Gang. I got it mixed up. It's Kool and the Gang that he brought. I love Kool and the Gang, Jungle Boogie and all that stuff, so that was a really, of course, Ed playing on Michael Jackson's Beat It. I mean, that's another thing that just fused those worlds together. Michael introduced Eddie to a new audience, and Eddie introduced Michael to a new audience. And it was a really cool thing. Also with the book, I mean, yes, Ed was a human, but he was also a genius and really one of a kind. And that's the other thing we wanted to portray him as in the book, was he was just not this partying rock star, who had conflicts with lead singers. He also invented instruments, and he had so much more to this guy than just the smiling guy playing the guitar solo in the Jump video. And that's really was our goal with this, was to present this wide reaching picture of Ed. That's not just, you know, some of the more crazy stuff, the rock and roll stuff, but also just this, you know, this genius.
You know, Brad, talk about mixing this, because remember, I came from an all-white town, East Lyme, Connecticut. There was only 3 Black families there in a town of 7,000. So I was always waiting for the rock world to fuse with the R&B, funk world, and everything else. And I always I was talking to Howard Bloom, Michael the Jackson's publicist, about these things. When Eddie comes in, there's a whole new audience coming in for Beat It when Michael comes in. But also in Eddie's childhood, his friends were Black who helped friend him. Talk about that leading up to Beat It and why that was huge.
Well, this is a very interesting and I think a crucial part of the book. You know, the Ed Van Halen story is, I think, a very contemporary kind of story, because he came here from another country, from Holland, and he didn't speak English. He was an immigrant when he came to the US. And when he went to school, the school that he went to was a segregated school. And he told me that because he wasn't speaking the language, they would put him in with the other minorities, with the Black kids, with the brown kids. And he said it was the white kids that used to heckle him and beat the shit out of him. And it was the Black kids and the brown kids in the area that totally stood up for him and defended him and were his closest and earliest friends. But, you know, that whole crossover thing. So it's sort of interesting. I mean, you know this about musicians. Musicians see music. They really don't see color. I really sort of believe that, you know? And so it's a great place for all sorts of interesting sort of cross-pollinations of cultures and feels and ideas and everything. And I do believe that the great thing about Van Halen, the one thing that you cannot deny, is that the groove is there. Ed's rhythm guitar playing is as freaking funky as it gets. And so, you know, I never saw Van Halen as Black or white or any of these things, you know. It was just great music. And, you know, I defy anybody to not listen to it and, you know, bang their head or whatever it is. It's going to move you, you know what I mean? But yeah, no, I don't think Ed was a guy that really, you know, saw things in terms of race. He saw things in terms of music. So, you know, he was sort of thrilled. And we talked about that in the book when Michael reached out to him, when Quincy Jones reached out to him to play on Michael's record. You know, he saw the importance of it, but it's funny because he had no idea that that the record was going to be as big as it was going to be. He just liked the idea of it, for the musicality, for the idea of working with a Michael Jackson, for working with a Quincy Jones, you know.
Chris, when you were writing about this, think about this. This is really where it does cross over. And I was starting my disc jockey days. So as you had the white Billboard and you had the Black R&B charts, and the world mixed. Even though Brad is right, they did mix. So when and then even in MTV, they weren't playing Michael Jackson, and they had forced. Prince was complaining about that. Rick James was complaining about that. But this is where I give Eddie a lot of credit. I really give him a lot of credit for helping Quincy and Michael get that over the hump. What's your view of that?
That's absolutely true. But, you know, it's sort of funny. I mean, I don't want to harp on this too much, but I grew up in Detroit, and Detroit radio was incredible. I mean, they called it Detroit Rock City, but the reason that Detroit radio was incredible was because they played everything.
Yep.
And you would just go across from station to station to station, and you know, you would be listening to some great Philly soul track, and then it would segue into a Van Halen track. It would segue into this, that, and the other thing. there were pockets in America that really were like that, you know, and I think especially in the 60s and early 70s, it was a lot less segregated. Then MTV came along and sort of pushed. In the very beginning, they were making it all just about white artists versus black artists. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Michael and Ed together, you know, helped to bridge that gap. And once MTV saw, well, gee, we can have a black artist and people aren't going to turn the channel.
Yeah.
In fact, they're going to watch it in numbers that we have never experienced before. That did change the course of things.
You know, one thing that's people don't realize too is this cross-pollination was kind of already going on. In fact, if you look online, there's some videos of Rick James back in like about 80 or 81. His guitar player is playing an Eddie Van Halen guitar. He's playing a black and yellow Charvel. Yeah. And he's even got the knee pads on. And his look is based on Eddie and Cameo, you know, and all this stuff. And then Ed did that. And then it went even further from there. And it kind of splintered off in all these directions and just exploded. But it was a cool thing to see that was going on. I mean, Ed was taking stuff from jazz, even, you listen to his playing. I mean, a lot of those songs in the first album, they swing, you know, like a big band jazz record or something like that. And Ed's playing is very jazzy and outside and everything. And it was really cool to see that once he got together with Michael, how everything kind of just went off and boom, you know, all these different directions. And we had a lot of this cross-pollination going on.
What is it? Miles Davis had said there's only two kinds of music, good music and bad music.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk about Gene Simmons not wanting to, well, that's not true. Talk about Kiss and Van Halen at that point. Why that kind of went a certain way. Chris first.
Well, yeah, with that it's really interesting because, you know, Rodney Bingenheimer is actually the guy who's really responsible for the discovery of Van Halen. You know, he goes into Gazzarri's and he's just going in to have a laugh with his buddy. He's going to go have some drinks and look at the girls, you know, and laugh at the band. And they were surprised to see this band that blew them away. So Rodney just immediately took him under his wing and introduced him to Gene and Paul. And then Gene fell in love with what he saw. How could you not? And said, you know, went out and produced this demo for them. And I mean, Paul, I think recently there was something I read that Paul was trying to say, like, well, we didn't sign Van Halen because it was going to compete with Kiss and we wanted to keep Gene under control. I think they just kind of missed the ball a bit here. I think a lot of people didn't understand them. And I think the demo they made wasn't really quite the right thing. I think Gene tried to infuse too much of like, this is how a record should sound on them. And they reined Eddie in, you know, especially they reined everybody in, you know, and kind of they toned them down. And that's not what they were about. And
well, Chris and I have been talking about how fortunate the world is that Gene never did produce the band, because he would have turned them into something more conventional. And it was great that Ted Templeman, who had a jazz background, came in and understood the dynamics between the band members and just put them in the studio and let them do their thing. I mean, the first few records are almost like basically live records.
Yeah. And I think the good thing about Gene is that Gene got the ball rolling for them, because once, you know, the word got out that, hey, Gene Simmons found this band, then all these record labels started going like, who are these guys? Yeah, okay, we've seen their name on the marquees around town and everything. Maybe we better go check them out. And you look at this period, they finished it up about December, you know, and between December and early February, and Ted Templeman walks into the Starwood and discovers them, people were like going like, okay, let's go check these guys out, you know, and you know, a lot of big names at the record labels were looking at them and interested. So it wasn't quite this rags to riches thing like they liked to paint back in the day. You know, they really were starting to take over LA and they were dominating the club scene out there. And it was really inevitable that somebody was going to sign them eventually. And fortunately it was Ted, because he knew exactly what to do. Just be yourselves.
So my second favorite song is Let Me Go Rock and Roll, from the live version from Detroit. As you were saying, Detroit Rock Scene.
Right. Nice.
I think it's 1975. That's the only version that I like.
Yeah.
And when I told Gene this, we were interviewing, I was interviewing him. I was the only one to get him. I was interviewing for Family Jewels. So there's a picture of me, Gene, and his entire family. I said, this,
Cool.
because there was only 7 of us in the green room in Pasadena at the Langham. And his publicist is Stan Rosenfeld, who's still my good friend, who has George Clooney, Danny DeVito. I go, Stan, can you take this? No one's going to believe that there's a photo of me and Gene, the whole family.
Right.
And it's classic. So I used
Cool.
that photo. And again, the reason I don't have certain photos is we weren't supposed to take photos with people. We weren't supposed to ask them the person thing. But I'm like, if I don't do it, no one's going to believe that I'm doing these things. And look where we are.
True.
Right? And here's the second thing. Anytime I saw Ted Templeman's name on an album, because I was that old school disc jockey that would read the film lyrics, and I miss seeing that stuff. I knew it was a good album. It didn't care if it was rock. I just knew it was a good produced album. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, Ted was an interesting guy. I mean, the great thing about Ted was it wasn't like there was a Ted Templeman sound.
Yeah.
He would talk, he would try to understand what the band was trying to accomplish. And like a good producer should do, is bring out the best of them and put that. So you do have like him producing Minute by Minute, which is by the Doobie Brothers, which is sort of a fairly slick commercial R&B flavored record. And then you would have him jump from that to Van Halen, as which is one of the more raw records you're going to hear, more energetic. So it wasn't like Ted was ever trying to impose. That's what made him a great producer. It wasn't like he had a sound and he was trying to impose his sound on the bands. He did his best to take that talent and bring out the best of them and do what was right for them in the studio.
Yeah, very interesting background with Ted, because, there was like Van Morrison, Nicolette Larson, the Doobie Brothers, Montrose before with Sammy Hagar. He produced a wide variety of music. He wasn't just pigeonholed into one style. And I think it was really fortuitous for him to be the one who discovered Van Halen, because he kind of took possession of them. And I think he really saw it was a diamond in the rough, but it's like, it was just cool in its own merits. And it's like, let's not polish this up too much. Let's let these guys be what they are. And the other fascinating thing is like, they did these demos. They did like 25 songs in a day initially, right after they made the contract official with Warner Brothers. And then the band had to take time off, and, they weren't allowed to play 5 gigs a week, at all the clubs around LA. And so they found themselves with, and you'll love this because this is how Ain't Talking About Love came about. And we mentioned this in the book, Ed and Dave and Al were going out to the whiskey and watching all the punk rock bands. And they just realized, hey, we can harness a bit of that energy. And they wrote Ain't Talking About Love and Atomic Punk and the song Loss of Control. And they also wrote Jamie's Crying, which that was on the opposite side. They were trying to write a hit. But what we really know and love about Van Halen really came together in this very brief window, this 3 to 4 months before they recorded the first album. Ed refined. Dave went in and got vocal coach, and improved his vocals. And it's kind of great that Ted had to step away and do the Doobie Brothers album, because that gave these guys time to really think about the impression that they were going to make. And of course, they wanted to make the best impression that they possibly could.
When you think about the history of stuff like that, I always looked at
who
is Van Halen is really David Lee Roth.
He froze.
Sammy Hagar comes in. What do you guys see?
Oh, you cut it out there.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Oh, you cut out there. So, yeah.
So I see David Lee Roth as being Van Halen. But when Sammy Hagar comes in, what are you two seeing at that point?
Ed's gross, basically. I mean, it was kind of inevitable that they were going to part ways, because Ed was growing constantly. And we saw that from the Fair Warning album, and especially 1984, where he had his own studio. And Ed was just really expanding his boundaries. He was playing more keyboards than ever before. He was writing a lot more variety of songs, and he needed somebody who could keep up with him. And Sammy provided that. Sammy was more of a traditional vocalist. He had a wider range, and that was just, it was really what Ed needed. You know, you might say that their songs got a little bit more conventional, but it allowed Ed to grow even more as a composer and as a guitarist. You know, it just, there was bigger production and everything. And just, and that's, I think just a break needed to be made. I think they almost kind of went as far as they could with David initially. And they just, you know, David wanted to do a certain different type of thing, and he wanted to become this different type of star. And Ed just wanted to really be a serious musician. And I think he was getting a little bit tired of just repeating himself.
So we got a couple minutes left. So Brad, talk about this. What do you have coming up? And what do you hope the average fan really appreciates about this book, Eruption?
Well, what do we have coming up right now? It's all about you, Sebastian. we're you know, we spent a long time working on this book and making it really great. So right now we just want as many people out there to read it and honor Ed as possible. Yeah. But you know, listen, here's what I feel about Ed and about this book, and why I think people should pick it up is he was, you know, arguably the most innovative guitarist since Jimi Hendrix, and therefore one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. And so, you know, we can talk about the marriages and the gossip and the infighting and everything, but it was very important for Chris and I to convey to the average, you know, to the fan and the average reader, why Eddie Van Halen was so important and why he was a great musician. And we didn't feel like a lot of people could really do that in the way that we could because of our backgrounds, and also because of how well we knew Ed. So we set out to tell his story in a definitive way, you know, by comparing and contrasting the events of his life in his own words with also the people that were closest to him. And that way creating this, you know, well-rounded portrait of him as a complex individual and a great musician, and go a little bit in the way of explaining, like, when people think like, why do I like this music so much? Why do I like that dude? So why do I like the guitar playing so much? You know, like, and that's why you care. You don't care because of his personal life. You care about the, you know, music. And so we wanted to do our best to show all of this stuff in this book.
And it was important to let him tell his own words. You know, that was the other thing, that we had this wealth of material of interviews with him. Probably, in fact, we know we have more interview as far as hours go with Ed than anybody else out there. And it was important that we let Ed tell his story, as well as us kind of filling in the blanks around that, because Ed didn't always tell you everything, you know, and there's just some historical details and whatever that he didn't get into. But it was important to really let Ed speak. And he didn't have an opportunity to sit down doing that for him. And we just want people to know Ed the way that we knew him. That's an important thing, because he was a great guy, you know, just on top of just being this genius, he was just a great, you know, warm person. So we spoke his language, you know, when he wanted to go deep about guitar pickups or amplifier tubes or whatever, we were along for the ride with him. You know, we understood what he was talking about, but that it caused him to open up about these other things that he might not have done otherwise, because it was just, you know, we were his people, you know, and we wanted, you know, to give the readers the feeling of what it was like to sit in the room with Ed like we had.
Hey, Brad, give your social media links for everybody to reach out to.
Pardon?
Your social media links for everybody.
Oh, you can, you know, I'm up there on Facebook. I'm up there on Insta, you know, just type in Brad Tolinski. I'll come up.
and Chris?
So far, I'm pretty much like the Unabomber. I don't have too much social media, but I do have an Instagram page, Chris Gill VH Writer. You can find me there. It'll probably be very nerdy for most people because I'm going to put up stuff about guitars I'm building and wacky amplifiers I've found and other stuff like that. And there'll be a few tidbits. I have photos I've taken of Van Halen throughout the years, starting in '79 when I was only 16 years old as a high school kid, and I smuggled a camera into the show. So I'll be putting those up from time to time. So if people want to, some stuff they haven't seen before, you can come to my Instagram.
But mostly we want you to go up and order this.
Yes, exactly.
And
this is why we're here, guys.
And with
Eruption
that,
Conversations. I just got this book today.
Did you really?
Got my copy today. It's awesome.
If you would have seen I had a camera on me, I was jumping up and down the best Eddie Van Halen jump I could do in the drive when I got it.
Go back out there. I want to see that Eddie Van Halen.
So as I say, Chris and Brad, thank you so much for coming on and telling what I want to do is I've got to have you on my live shows with this because on Tuesdays we have 1.7 million views and only 44 shows around the world.
Wow,
really well. So I got to expand it for you. So
give us a call, we can hang.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say this: if you see someone without a smile, please give them one of yours because the world needs it. I'm Brian Sebastian. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Brad, and we will see you next week.